Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
The room hums with the sound of clinking glasses, polished laughter, and the kind of chatter that drips with carefully measured pleasantries. It's the kind of event where no one really listens, they just wait for their turn to speak, where people sip overpriced champagne and pretend they care about the couple of the hour. But I'm used to this. I knew what I was walking into when I agreed to marry David, a man whose last name carries more weight than some family legacies. The engagement party is held at a country club, the kind that makes it painfully obvious who belongs and who doesn't. David belongs. His family practically has their names carved into the damn walls. I, however, am a different story. I hear it in the polite but pointed questions, the way people ask what I do with just a hint of skepticism, as if measuring my worth, trying to determine whether I'm here because I love David or because I love the idea of what being with him can provide. And then, just as I'm taking a sip of my drink, Richard, David's father, a man whose presence alone feels like an expensive cologne-drenched power move, raises his glass, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Hope you signed a prenup. She's just marrying up." The words drop like a stone into a still pond, sending ripples across the room. For a moment, there's an almost comical silence, a collective inhale as people register what he just said. Then, nervous laughter bubbles up from a few guests, the kind of forced chuckling people do when they don't know whether they should laugh or pretend they didn't hear. I don't move, don't react. I just watch Richard as he leans back in his chair, swirling his drink with an air of smug satisfaction, as if he's just delivered the night's best joke. His eyes flick to me, waiting, expecting what? A blush of embarrassment? An awkward, tight-lipped smile? But before I can say a word, David does something that makes the entire moment shift. He raises his own glass, a small smirk playing at the corner of his mouth, and speaks loud enough for everyone to hear. Actually, I'm the one signing it. Her name's on the deed to this house. Silence. Real silence this time. Richard's smirk falters, his grip on his glass tightening just slightly. The satisfaction in his expression vanishes like smoke in the wind. He wasn't expecting that. He wasn't expecting his son, his golden boy, to flip the narrative, to upend his little attempt at a public humiliation and turn it into something that makes him look foolish instead. And that's when I realized something important. Richard isn't just arrogant, he's the kind of man who thrives on control. And control, to him, means knowing that the people in his orbit need him, depend on him, owe him. But in this moment, he sees the cracks forming in the picture he's built in his head. I meet his gaze across the room, holding it for just a second longer than necessary. A slow smile tugs at my lips. "Cheers," I say smoothly, raising my glass just enough to acknowledge the moment. Richard says nothing, just nods stiffly, swallows his drink a little too quickly, and sits back, his jaw tight. The conversation shifts, people begin murmuring again, the party resumes as if nothing happened. But something did happen. Richard's been embarrassed in his own territory, and men like him don't forget a slight like that. That night, after the last of the guests have gone and I'm in the kitchen rinsing champagne flutes, I hear voices from the other room. David and his father, their words hushed but sharp. "Are you out of your damn mind?" Richard hisses, his voice lower now, but no less biting. "You can't let a woman have leverage over you. First, it's a house, then it's everything else. You think love protects you from making a stupid financial mistake?" My fingers tighten around the stem of a glass. David sighs, the sound heavy, tired. "It's not like that, Dad. This isn't some business deal." "That's exactly what it is," Richard snaps. "And if you were half as smart as I raised you to be, you'd see that." I don't move, don't make a sound, just stand there, listening, my pulse slow and steady. Because now I know the truth. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. At first, it happens so gradually that I almost don't notice it, like a storm gathering on the horizon, its presence barely more than a whisper of wind before the real destruction begins. Richard starts inserting himself into our lives in ways that feel small, insignificant, almost harmless, an offer to help pay for part of the wedding, a casual mention of how expensive certain venues are. A well-timed comment about financial responsibility slipped into conversations when David is most receptive to his influence. He plays the long game, carefully planting seeds of doubt and watching as they take root, his tactics so smooth and deliberate that even David doesn't seem to realize what's happening. At first, I try to ignore it, tell myself that it's just a father being overprotective, that he's testing me the way men like him always test the people they think don't belong in their world. But then, little things start changing, subtle at first, easy to brush off, yet impossible to completely ignore. David, once unwaveringly sure of us, starts hesitating in conversations about money, his voice carrying a new edge of caution whenever we discuss wedding expenses or long-term plans. It isn't just words, either. It's his body language, the way his shoulders stiffen when I mention that I've finalized a catering contract, the way his eyes flick away when I joke about how much my dress costs. I tell myself I'm imagining it, that I'm looking for problems where there aren't any, but then, one evening, I find something that confirms everything I've been trying to deny. It's just sitting there, out in the open, as if he didn't even think to hide it, a printed email resting on our kitchen counter, the subject line stark and cold in its simplicity, protecting your future, a discussion on postnuptial agreements. The sender's name makes my stomach clench before I even read the message, Richard Caldwell. My eyes scan the email, each word sinking deeper into my chest, weighing me down with a slow-burning fury that simmers just beneath my skin. David, I spoke with my attorney today, and he strongly recommends you consider a postnup before moving forward with the wedding. There's nothing wrong with love, but love won't protect you in court if things go south. This is just a safety net, son. If she's as committed as you say, she'll understand. The paper trembles slightly in my grip, my breath slow and measured as I absorb what this really means. It's not just about money, it never was. This is about power, about Richard making sure that even if I stay, even if I become part of this family, I never truly belong. When David walks through the door that evening, tired and distracted, his tie loose and his shirt sleeves rolled up, I don't say anything right away. I let him move around the kitchen, let him set down his briefcase and pour himself a drink, let him settle into the comfort of home before I place the email in front of him, watching as he registers what it is. His reaction tells me everything before he even opens his mouth. His shoulders tighten, his jaw locks, and his eyes flick to mine with something dangerously close to guilt. Care to explain? I ask, my voice even controlled, despite the fire burning beneath my ribs. He exhales sharply, rubbing the back of his neck before finally answering. It's not what you think. I arch an eyebrow, folding my arms as I lean against the counter. Really? Because it looks a lot like your father thinks I need to prove I'm not some gold-digging parasite before he'll let me marry you. David sighs, his fingers tapping against the glass in his hand. It's not about that, okay? My dad he thinks it's smart. It's standard practice in families like mine. It's not about trust, it's just legal security. A bitter laugh escapes me before I can stop it, the sheer audacity of his words hitting me harder than I expected. Legal security, I repeat, shaking my head. So let me get this straight. Your father, the man who humiliated me in front of an entire room full of people, now wants me to sign a document proving that I have no interest in your money, even though I was financially stable long before you came along? And you think that's just reasonable? David shifts uncomfortably, his grip tightening around his glass. It's not about what I think, it's about making things easier in the long run. If it's really not a big deal to you, then why are you so upset? The sheer absurdity of the question nearly knocks the air from my lungs. Why am I upset? I echo, my voice dangerously quiet. Because this isn't about logic, David. This isn't about making things easier. This is about your father making damn sure that no matter what happens, I always know my place. He exhales, looking away for a moment before muttering, "It's just paperwork." And that's when I realize the full extent of the damage Richard has done. David isn't fighting for me. Not really. He's caught somewhere between loyalty to his father and loyalty to me, and the fact that he's hesitating, that he's even considering entertaining this nonsense, tells me everything I need to know. He isn't strong enough to stand up to Richard, not in the way I need him to be. And if I don't do something soon, Richard is going to win. I take a deep breath, schooling my features into something calm, something unreadable, before stepping closer to him. "You know what, David?" I say, my tone almost sweet, almost gentle, despite the sharpness lurking beneath it. "You're right. It's just paperwork. And if it's so important to your father, who am I to stand in the way?" The relief that flickers across his face is almost insulting. He smiles, reaching for my hand, thinking that I've finally come around to seeing reason. But what he doesn't realize is that I've just made a decision, one that will change everything. I won't be manipulated. I won't be controlled. And most importantly, I won't let Richard think for even 1 second that he's won. Because this game? It's only just begun. Richard thinks he has me backed into a corner, thinks I'll cave under the weight of his constant manipulation, thinks that if he applies just enough pressure in just the right places, I'll eventually give in and become exactly the kind of woman he believes I should be: obedient, agreeable, grateful for the scraps of approval he's willing to offer. But what he doesn't know, what he'll never see coming, is that I don't break under pressure. I sharpen. The night after my conversation with David, I lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through every moment, every interaction, every thinly veiled insult that Richard has thrown my way since the day I walked into his son's life. I think about the smirk he wore when he made that prenup comment at our engagement party, the way he dismissed me without a second thought, like I was nothing more than an inconvenience, a temporary problem that would eventually solve itself. And then I think about the email, the postnup, the way David hesitated when I confronted him, the way he let his father's voice creep into his own. That's when I know I can't just sit back and wait for Richard to tighten the noose. I have to strike first. The next morning, I make a call to an old friend, someone I met back when I was first starting my career, someone who has a talent for finding things that people don't want to be found. I don't tell him everything, don't give him details, just a simple request. I need you to look into Richard Caldwell. Every business deal, every financial transaction, every shell company he's ever touched. Find me something I can use. It doesn't take long. 2 days later, I get a message, a simple text that makes my blood run cold. "You're going to want to see this in person." When we meet, he hands me a folder, thick and heavy, the kind of weight that carries consequences. Inside, I find pages of documents, bank statements, transaction records, and names of companies I don't recognize because they don't really exist. Richard Caldwell, the self-made businessman, the man who prides himself on building his empire from the ground up, isn't as clean as he pretends to be. He's been funneling money through offshore accounts, hiding assets, moving funds under different names to avoid taxes, building a fortune not through hard work, but through careful deception. If the IRS were to catch wind of this, if just one of these transactions were traced back to him, everything he's built would come crashing down. I sit back in my chair, exhaling slowly, feeling the pieces click into place. Richard thought he had all the power, thought he was untouchable, thought that no one could ever challenge him on his own playing field. But he underestimated me. And now I have exactly what I need to turn the tables. I don't act immediately. No, that would be too easy. Instead, I wait, bide my time, let the information settle in my mind like a loaded gun waiting to be fired. The perfect moment comes a few days later, during one of the many family dinners that Richard insists on hosting. The kind where everyone is expected to sit around an absurdly large table and pretend that this family isn't built on passive-aggressive power struggles. The conversation is casual at first, meaningless chatter about wedding preparations, business ventures, the latest political scandal that Richard has a loud and entirely unwarranted opinion on. But then, just as the waiter refills my glass, just as the conversation lulls for a brief moment, I lean back in my chair, swirling my wine, and say, "You know, Richard, I was reading about offshore accounts the other day. Apparently, the government has been cracking down on tax evasion lately. It's fascinating, really. Some of these companies think they can hide money forever, but sooner or later, someone always finds the trail. For just a second, just a fraction of a breath, Richard freezes. It's subtle, the kind of reaction that most people wouldn't notice, but I do. His fork pauses midway to his mouth, his knuckles tighten just slightly, his eyes flick to mine with something that almost looks like recognition, like he knows I'm not just making small talk. But then, just as quickly as it appeared, the reaction vanishes, replaced by a carefully constructed smile. Is that so? He says, his voice smooth, practiced, unreadable. Oh, absolutely, I reply, tilting my head slightly. You'd be surprised how easy it is to trace money when you know where to look. David glances between us, confused, oblivious to the silent war happening right in front of him. Richard holds my gaze for a long moment, something calculating flickering behind his eyes, and I know he's trying to decide whether I'm bluffing. That's when I see it. The fear. It's there, buried beneath years of arrogance, hidden behind the confidence of a man who has always been in control. But I see it. He knows. He knows I know. After dinner, Richard pulls me aside, his grip firm on my arm as he leads me toward his study. He closes the door behind us, the sound loud in the quiet room, and turns to face me with an expression that's half amusement, half warning. You don't know what you're talking about, he says, his voice lower now, more controlled. I smile, slow and sharp, tilting my head as I meet his gaze. Don't I? For the first time since I met him, Richard doesn't have a response. The next day, David receives a message from his father, an unexpected offer, one that should feel like a victory, but instead tastes like desperation. Richard wants to pay for the wedding venue in full, every last cent, no strings attached. Or at least, not the kind of strings he's willing to admit to. But I know better. This isn't generosity. It's panic. And I'm just getting started. David comes home later than usual, his face pale, his posture tense, his fingers gripping the strap of his briefcase so tightly that his knuckles turn white. I watch him as he stands in the doorway, shifting awkwardly, his mouth pressing into a thin line, like he's struggling to find the right words, but knows that no matter how he phrases them, the conversation we're about to have won't end well for either of us. He exhales sharply, dropping his bag onto the counter with a dull thud, then runs a hand through his hair, his frustration practically vibrating off of him. My dad told me you threatened him. The words hang in the air between us, heavy with accusation, weighted with something unspoken, something deeper, something laced with disappointment. I stare at him for a moment, letting the ridiculousness of the statement settle into my bones, then let out a short, humorless laugh, shaking my head as I cross my arms over my chest. Threatened? I repeat, tilting my head slightly, watching his face for any sign of doubt, any flicker of hesitation that might tell me he doesn't fully believe the bullshit his father is feeding him. No, David, I didn't threaten him. Exposed? Maybe. But I wouldn't call that a threat, I'd call it a much-needed reality check. David's jaw tightens, his lips pressing together in a thin, disapproving line, his shoulders rising and falling with the weight of whatever internal battle he's fighting. I can see it in his eyes, the struggle between logic and loyalty, between the undeniable truth and the carefully constructed lie his father has been feeding him his entire life. He wants to believe me, I can tell, but the pull of family, of blood, of years spent idolizing a man who doesn't deserve it, it's stronger than he realizes. He said you brought up offshore accounts, David continues, his voice quieter now, like he's afraid of what my answer might be. He said you were digging into his business, that you're trying to ruin him. I let out another laugh, this one colder, sharper, laced with something dangerous, something just shy of rage. Trying to ruin him? I echo, shaking my head again, stepping forward, closing the distance between us. David, your father did that to himself the second he decided to build his empire on fraud and tax evasion. All I did was shine a little light on the mess he's been trying to keep hidden. If that feels like a threat to him, maybe he should be asking himself why. David exhales again, turning away from me, bracing his hands against the counter like the weight of the conversation is pressing him down, making it harder to stand. He's silent for a long moment, staring at the marble like it holds the answers he's too afraid to confront. Then finally, In a voice so quiet I almost don't hear it, he says, "I need to think." And that's when I realize something that makes my stomach twist, something that feels like a slow, deep crack forming in the foundation of everything I thought we had. David isn't strong enough to stand up to his father. He isn't strong enough to choose me over the man who has spent his entire life controlling him, manipulating him, shaping him into the perfect heir to a legacy built on lies. It doesn't matter how much he loves me, doesn't matter how much he wants to believe I'm the one telling the truth, fear wins. Fear of losing his family's approval, fear of being cut off, fear of what it means to defy a man like Richard Caldwell. And suddenly, I know. This wedding isn't happening. Not because I don't love David, not because I don't want to fight for him, but because I refuse to spend the rest of my life battling a ghost I'll never fully exorcise from his mind. Richard's voice will always be there, lurking in the shadows, whispering doubts, planting seeds of suspicion, making sure that no matter how strong our love is, it will never be stronger than the fear he's spent years cultivating in his son. I take a deep breath, straightening my shoulders, forcing my expression into something unreadable, something calm, despite the storm raging inside me. "Take all the time you need, David," I say smoothly, stepping past him, reaching for my coat. "But while you're thinking, ask yourself this. Do you really want to marry a woman your father will never stop trying to destroy? Because if you do, then you need to decide whose voice matters more, mine or his." I don't wait for a response. I don't look back, because I already know the answer. And if David won't choose me over his father, then I'll make sure he has nothing left to choose. The decision to report Richard's financial crimes is not one I make lightly, but by the time I finally do it, there is no hesitation left in me, no doubt, no lingering guilt about what it means to be the reason a man loses everything. I don't think of it as revenge, not really, because revenge implies emotion, implies a need for personal satisfaction, implies that I care enough about his downfall to let it consume me. But this isn't about personal satisfaction, it's about justice, about making sure that a man who has spent his life stepping on others to maintain his empire finally faces the consequences he's been avoiding for far too long. I do it quietly, without warning, without spectacle, without so much as a whisper of my involvement. The information is handed over anonymously, neatly packaged, carefully compiled, sent to the right people with no trace leading back to me. I don't sit around waiting for something to happen, don't pace the floor wondering when the hammer will finally drop, don't spend my days refreshing news pages in anticipation of Richard Caldwell's downfall. Instead, I go on with my life, knowing that whether it takes weeks or months, the inevitable will happen. And then it does. The first sign comes in the form of a headline, a small blurb tucked between bigger stories, something most people might skim past without a second thought. High-profile CEO under federal investigation for financial misconduct. It's vague, nondescript, lacking the full weight of what I know is coming, but it's enough. A week later, the headlines grow bolder, the whispers turning into conversations, the conversations turning into something louder, something undeniable, something Richard can no longer bury beneath expensive lawyers and carefully crafted press statements. Then the real damage begins. His business accounts are frozen, his assets placed under scrutiny, his every financial move dissected by auditors who have been waiting for a case like his to land on their desks. The empire he spent his life building is crumbling beneath him, the walls closing in, the carefully laid foundation cracking under the weight of his own arrogance. I imagine him in his office, the same office where he sat smugly the night he told David to have me sign a postnup, watching as everything he's built turns to ash in his hands. David calls me, once, during the early stages of the investigation, his voice carrying something I can't quite place. Desperation, maybe, or regret, or some twisted version of loyalty that no longer matters. He doesn't ask if I had anything to do with it, doesn't accuse me, doesn't demand explanations or beg for the truth. Instead, he just breathes heavily into the phone, then mutters, "It's over, isn't it?" I don't ask what he means by that, whether he's talking about the wedding or his father's legacy or the version of himself that existed before he was forced to confront the truth. I just let the silence stretch between us, heavy and suffocating, until he finally exhales one last time and hangs up. The wedding, of course, never happens. The invitations never get sent. The venue deposit never gets paid. The dress that once felt like a symbol of something unshakable stays in its box, untouched, forgotten, nothing more than fabric and false promises. I don't mourn it, don't feel the ache of loss that people expect me to feel, don't waste a single tear on the life I was supposed to have with a man who was never strong enough to stand beside me. And the house? That's still mine. Months pass, the world moves on, and then, one evening, I find myself driving past the country club where this all started, the place where Richard made his little joke, the place where he first tried to remind me of my place in his world. And there he is, sitting alone on the patio, his once pristine suit looking just a little less crisp, his shoulders just a little less squared, his entire posture carrying the weight of a man who has lost something he never thought could be taken from him. There's a piece of paper on the table in front of him, something official, something that looks suspiciously like a foreclosure notice, and for the first time since this all began, I allow myself the smallest flicker of satisfaction. I slow my steps as I pass, not enough to be obvious, just enough for him to feel my presence, just enough for him to know I'm there. His eyes lift, meeting mine for the briefest of moments, and for the first time since I've known him, there is no arrogance, no condescension, no smug superiority in his expression, only exhaustion, only the quiet, suffocating weight of loss. I pause, just for a second, just long enough to let the moment linger, then tilt my head slightly and murmur, "Hope you signed a prenup," because karma doesn't come cheap. I don't wait for a response, don't linger to see if he has anything left to say, because there's nothing left to be said. I walk away, the night settling around me, the air crisp with the scent of something that smells a lot like closure.